Welcome to this Recovery Boost Capability Building online training session, presented by the Social Research Centre on behalf of the State Insurance Regulatory Authority. In this session, we will walk through how to plan your project. During the session, we will discuss how everything comes together through effective project planning. This will include showing you how to prepare a detailed project plan that includes a timeline for your project, activities and tasks, milestones and responsibilities. We will also look at developing risk management strategies and creating a project budget, plus some other considerations such as ethical implications and conflict of interest. We'll close our webinar series with a brief reminder of the Recovery Boost grant application process. Planning your project encompasses everything we've already discussed and is what's required throughout delivery of your project. This diagram shows the broad process for project planning, including understanding the Recovery Boost program, including reading through the program guidelines and application form, designing your project, and planning how to evaluate your project. This brings together all elements covered in the previous sessions and makes the project happen. Project planning and management is continuous throughout the entire project. You don't just do project management at one point, as you need to continuously check your progress towards achieving your milestones and meeting deadlines. A project plan provides a documented roadmap that describes the implementation and conduct of a project. Project plans come in a range of forms, but they generally describe what needs to happen, how it should happen, who is responsible for doing it, and what the associated timelines are. They document all aspects of a project in detail, including time frame, roles and responsibilities, and services and products being delivered. Good planning also involves identification of potential risks with mitigation strategies and the resources required to conduct the project. Project management is the process of overseeing the conduct of all the planned project elements. It often involves ongoing assessment and revision of the plans. They're not a static document and need to change over time as the project evolves due to changes in project scope, timelines, and the people involved. As the project occurs, it is worth asking yourself, has an activity been completed? Has a deliverable been met? If not, why not, and what might need to change? Project plans provide reassurance to stakeholders and funders that resources are managed appropriately. This accountability element is important for being able to show CIRA what you have delivered with the Recovery Boost funding. Project planning and management approaches should be designed to suit the nature of the project, organizations, and people involved. There is some flexibility in how you create a project plan, depending on the type of organization you are in and the work that is being delivered. It's important to create a project plan that suits the nature of the project you are running. This diagram shows the key elements of a project plan, including the time frame, activities, milestones, and responsibilities. As you can see, some of these elements, such as activities and milestones, link up with the program logic we discussed in the session on planning how to evaluate your project. This illustrates that you can start planning your project with the end outcomes and evaluation in mind, and use this to then work backwards and think about each step of your project. Project schedules are useful for determining the time frame for the whole project and each activity or task of the project, including identification of completion dates. You need to realistically consider how long each activity will take and when deliverables will be completed. You can draw on your experiences of previous service delivery and projects to determine what a realistic timeframe would be for this project. A Gantt chart is a common tool that provides a graphical illustration of a project schedule. Here we have an example Gantt chart for the Regional Council case study, which breaks down each of the identified activities and indicates when these activities are likely to occur over the project timeline. Gantt charts can be more detailed than this, including breaking down the schedule by weeks and days. You can use activities from the program logic to identify specific tasks that will need to be undertaken. In a project plan, you need to describe each task that will be undertaken during each activity. Deliverables are the specific outputs, such as products and services, that are produced during the project. Milestones and deliverables should align with the outputs identified in the program logic, but you may want to add more detail when you create your project plan. They may be produced during specific activities or when the project is completed. There should be a clear line between the activities you'll be undertaking and the milestones and deliverables that will be achieved. Examples could include training sessions, events, reports, and meetings. These would depend on the specific focus of your project. As part of the responsibilities section in your project plan, you need to identify the roles for each person involved in the project, including who is responsible for each activity and task that will be undertaken. This allows accountability to be documented and managed over time, including when changes are made to the project design. Governance structures can also be captured in roles and responsibilities, including reporting lines and management structures.
Managing risks. Risk management is a key part of effective project planning and management. It allows for the identification, assessment, and management of potential risks to a project. So what are risks? A risk is an uncertain event or condition that could occur. If it does occur, it may affect the project deliverables in some way. A good way to describe a risk is in three components: the example risk, the cause of that risk, and the impact. So using our case study example, an example risk is the filming in Park A is delayed. What's the cause of that risk? Because an extreme weather event results in damaging conditions during the scheduled filming. The potential impact: the filming takes longer to develop than planned. So how do we assess risks? This process is very much about thinking through the logic of a possible risk scenario, with an assessment of how likely it is to happen and what the potential consequence may be if it were to occur. This is often a personal, subjective judgment based on your experience and knowledge. Risk ratings are a common way of categorizing the severity of likelihood and the consequence, which can inform how much effort you might put into mitigating that risk. Risk ratings can often be defined to suit your project. There is no one size fits all. How do we go about mitigating risks? Well, firstly, we develop a strategy to prepare for the identified risk in order to reduce the impact. Strategies might be preventative, which are designed to modify the environment to prevent the risk from taking place. Or it might be a contingency to plan for alternative approaches. Your risk rating might inform the resource you put aside for the mitigation strategy. A higher rated risk might require some funds or people power to set aside. Lower level risks might only require periodic monitoring. Risk registers are very commonly documented in a project plan. This layout presents a very simple way to document risks for our case study example. This first one describes a risk of a delay in planned filming of interviews in the park because of unfavourable weather conditions, which means filming cannot take place during the scheduled time frame, and therefore filming takes longer than planned. The likelihood we've rated as medium, and the consequence we've rated as high. The mitigation strategy describes the delay in filming will delay majority of all subsequent project activities, and we want to ensure multiple parks in other regions or alternative undercover options are available as backup filming locations. So we've ensured that there is a contingency for this particular risk to ensure that there is in fact no delay to the project. This second example here describes a loss of core team members, which I've rated as a low likelihood and low consequence in the short time frame of the project. partly because my mitigation strategy allows a structure of backup staff with knowledge of the project to be ready to assist. Now, this could be rated quite differently in different circumstances. For example, the project manager might be quite integral and irreplaceable. So your ratings really are your own judgment for the purpose of your own projects. Development of a project budget is something that is needed in the planning phase of any project. This table represents the common elements that will be needed for your Recovery Boost application to CIRA. It's important to understand this budget represents the total cost to run your project, not just an estimate of what the grant component might cover. So the income elements up the top, we've got the first one described as contributions from your organisation. This might represent funds that will come in from known fundraising or operating activities, for example. The other income amount is anything not captured elsewhere. In-kind contributions allow you to identify inputs that don't really come in the form of tangible dollars, for example, donations or loaning of filming equipment, which will mean that you don't actually need to purchase that equipment yourself. So it represents an in-kind contribution to the income of the project. The expenditure items. Now, there are usually more categories for this than the income categories. So you need to estimate the salaries and on-costs for employees who will be working on a project. Any external contractors who will be brought in and need to be paid separately. Any administrative costs such as printing or stationery items. Capital costs, these might be building or venue investments. Travel costs. In the case of this program, there's a New South Wales government policy that stipulates benchmark travel items such as flights and accommodation. And then any other items that aren't really captured in one of the other categories. So it's important that you itemise this information as best you can. A couple of other considerations we wanted to touch on that are important in the project planning phase. Ethical implications. It's important to include a summary of any ethical issues you've identified and whether you think approval might be needed prior to conducting your project. You need to consider the potential risk of harm to people participating. Now, this is not necessarily physical, this could be emotional harm, which is often likely in mental health projects. You must respect the rights, privacy, dignity and entitlements of those affected by or contributing to your project or its evaluation. Now, ethics for program evaluation should be considered in the context of human research ethics and integrity. Now, there's often a distinction to the way ethics is assessed for health service provision versus research purposes. If an evaluation involves high ethical risk, an application for an external ethics review might be needed. So we've included a couple of resources here for you to look into further information or get a bit more guidance on ethical considerations. Finally, conflict of interest. It's important that you include any perceived conflict of interest you or your organisation might have. Even if you're unsure, it's better to raise it in your application. It's important to note that a conflict doesn't exclude you from consideration of a Recovery Boost grant. It simply highlights something that might need to be monitored as part of the risk management activities. We've reached the end of our webinar series, so I'm just going to finish by recapping on the process of submitting your application. Just to recap on the information presented in the first introductory webinar. Firstly, the applications need to demonstrate at least one funding principle and at least one funding category in the EOI and application forms. You need to demonstrate how your projects are over and above your organisation's normal service delivery. that you are proposing a distinct project with a specific start date and end date, with an outcome or result that's deliverable at the end of the project, rather than business as usual. You will also need to demonstrate capacity to deliver a project through the skills, experience and resources. And finally, a reminder that you must complete all sections in the expression of interest and application forms. So it'll be important to articulate how your projects demonstrate all the different elements of the project design, the evaluation, the planning concepts discussed in this series of webinars. Now, if you have any questions, you can reach out via email, or the website listed here provides all the relevant information about the application process and upcoming dates to be aware of. Thank you for listening. This concludes the Capability Training webinar series that's been produced as part of the Recovery Boost Grant program. We hope you found all the information informative, and we wish you the very best with your applications for a Recovery Boost Grant.